school. Equally exciting too is, of course, when you hear parents speak and offer their insights in a forum like this, that they talk about the value of the school to their boys and to their families. And our next speaker is Catharine Zeuthen. Catharine is a parent of a current senior at MBA Thomas and is a dedicated volunteer and a great supporter at the school. Prior to full-time parenting, Catharine worked as an educator, earning her Master's in Education in Special Education with a focus on learning disabilities and dyslexia. Catharine taught in Atlanta and Nashville for 10 years. She is a member of the Orton Gillingham Academy and has trained teachers in this methodology for many years. And as I say, her son, she has a son Thomas, class of 2020, and a daughter Anna, who's the class of 2023 at our sister school, Harpeth Hall. At MBA, Catharine has served with the MBA Mothers Club and on its executive board and helps running with the Big Red Store. So, without further ado, I'll ask Catharine to come up. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Catharine Zeuthen, as he said, and I am a mother of a senior at MBA as well as a daughter in the 9th grade at our sister school, Harpeth Hall. My son started at MBA in the 7th grade. As he said also, I was an elementary educator and a teacher trainer before I had kids and then decided to stay at home to raise them. I've been able to spend a lot of time at MBA over the past 6 years volunteering through the Mothers Club. It is hard to believe that our time here is winding down and soon my son will be going to college. He has grown academically and personally, and we are so proud of the man he is becoming. The topic of my talk today is regarding the soul of a boy. When I was told what the topic was, I was a bit overwhelmed and also confused because the word soul has so many different connotations to so many different people. Not being a religious school, I wasn't sure where my talk should venture. After doing a Google deep dive, I came upon a quote from The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry that has shaped my thoughts for today. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. In order to focus on the practical and the how-to that as educators and parents we are craving, I wanted to ask this question of all of you. How can we see the essential, the soul, in each of the boys that we encounter? I've attempted to answer this question myself, and we'll talk about some ways that we can hope to see what is invisible to the eye. Being vulnerable is scary for teenagers. As I stand here before you with my knees knocking, I can honestly say that being vulnerable is terrifying for adults. I know that everyone in this audience can identify with this fear in your personal and professional lives. So how do we encourage vulnerability in the boys in our lives? I'm a big fan of the author and researcher Brené Brown, as are many of the other mothers here at MBA. She has dedicated her life to studying vulnerability. She writes, "Vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness. Courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen." This is the ultimate goal for parents and educators, to create a safe space where boys can show up and let themselves be seen. As I said earlier, vulnerability is difficult for everyone, but I think we can agree that there are parameters around being a boy or a man that do not include vulnerability. We hear the terms man up, or be a man, or suck it up. These have a variety of traits associated with them, but being vulnerable is not one of them. And yet, to be vulnerable is to have courage, and we do associate that trait with men, but in the superhero John Wayne sense. So how do we encourage them to be more courageous? How could you actually be more vulnerable and more courageous than speaking your truth and allowing yourself to be seen? But for our boys, it is like walking the plank in front of all of their peers. I believe that this is heightened at an all-boys school. So how do we encourage vulnerability so that we can really see the soul of each boy? As a parent, I can say that one of the best ways is to share your own failures and embarrassments with your children. Both of my children can recite the stories of times when I faltered in childhood, as well as my husband. We have made it a point to share those times with them so that they can see it is just a part of this human journey that we're all on. I always found that being willing to admit your wrongdoings was important also. As authority figures for these boys, it seems crazy to admit a mistake or a failing, but stop and think of the teachers you knew who admitted that they had made a mistake and were willing to fix it. I was intimidated by my French teacher in high school and can remember coming to class without my assigned book one day and having her dress me down in front of my classmates. It was humiliating and was a rare occurrence for me as a diligent student. I held back my tears and wanted to run out of the room, but looked on with a fellow student who offered me a glance of support. The next day, the teacher sought me out in the hallway and asked to speak to me in her room. My stomach dropped, as I feared that there would be additional discipline. I immediately showed her my book to reassure her that I was prepared. I'll never forget what happened next, as she took my hand and apologized for scolding me so harshly the day before. She shared that her husband had received some bad news regarding his health and that she realized that she had taken out some of her frustration on me. As I think back on this moment, I can clearly list multiple instances of yelling at my kids when I had other stressors on my mind. I can imagine that everyone here can conjure up some of those times as well. We are all human, and sometimes our emotions get the best of us. The truly wonderful part of that story is that this strict disciplinarian was willing to admit her wrongdoing and share her vulnerability. It is a moment that shaped me as a 16-year-old, and I continue to go back to as an almost 50-year-old. It is more than okay to share our vulnerability with these boys. It is actually critical. On January 1st of this new year, David Brooks, acclaimed and award-winning journalist at the New York Times, retweeted a chart from the American Enterprise Institute. He titled his tweet, "The Crisis of Masculinity in a Chart." The chart was organized by Mark Perry of the AEI and was originally created by Tom Mortensen in Education Week in 2011. Perry updated the chart with more recent statistics, including 2019, when he posted it in a blog posted on the AEI website. The chart is titled, "For Every 100 Girls, Women." I encourage you to seek out the information to read it yourselves, but I'll warn you, it is incredibly scary stuff. The topics covered are birth and death, K through 12 education, special education, higher education, educational attainment of young adults, and other indicators. In every single area, boys are suffering. Here are some of the data. For every 100 girls and women aged 15 to 24 years who die, 280 boys and men die. For every 100 girls expelled from public elementary and secondary schools, 291 boys are expelled. For every 100 college-bound high school senior girls in the top 10% of her class, there are 79 boys. For every 100 girls in K through 12 in public schools who are classified as having a specific learning disability, there are 207 boys. For every 100 women who are homeless, there are 154 men. For every 100 women who die by opioid overdose, 212 men die. And for every 100 females aged 15 to 19 who commit suicide, there are 293 males. I am just highlighting a few of these statistics, and I encourage you to read more. When I first read these statistics, I was genuinely worried for the male gender and wondered what about being intrinsically male is fragile. I believe that the resistance to encouraging vulnerability is a large piece of this puzzle. What happens when a boy opens up to a coach or a teacher or a parent and says that he's feeling depressed, or even more likely that he just doesn't feel right? The hope is he'll be directed to getting some help and told that it takes courage to reach out. Or even better, a shared experience with a mental health experience to let the boy know that he's not alone. Isn't being a teenager the most isolating experience? That feeling of knowing that he is normal and that seeking help is manly and brave. I don't think this is happening very often, and the statistics can support my belief. By being vulnerable, boys can show us what is in their hearts and souls, but we have to encourage this vulnerability and model it as well. So what is the greatest fear of being vulnerable? Failure. As educators and parents, we must validate failure and actually encourage it. So how do we do that? We talk about our own failures and how success only occurs when failure comes before it. My favorite quote about failure is the famous quote of President Theodore Roosevelt that author Brené Brown brought back into public focus with her book, Daring Greatly. The quote is, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, but there is no effort without error or shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." What a better way to talk about failure with a group of boys. You can almost hear the soundtrack to Rocky in the background. Sweat and blood mixed with victory and defeat. I think all of us want to be that man in the arena, don't we? This is easier said than done because honestly, it hurts when you fail. We all remember lovable Charlie Brown of the Peanuts cartoons. Poor Charlie Brown fails every time when trying to kick that football, but is there anyone more in the arena than Charlie Brown? Charles Schulz, the creator of the Peanuts cartoons, had his drawings rejected by his high school yearbook. He persevered, and what a turnaround. The revenue from the Peanuts cartoons is over $1 billion a year. His high school has since put a statue of Snoopy in their main office, but I think Charlie Brown would be more appropriate. Back to Rocky, and spoiler alert, if you haven't actually seen this classic American film, Rocky actually loses the big fight, but he wins in love with Adrian, and for the writer Sylvester Stallone, an Oscar and a movie career. The concept of failure being a positive step towards success isn't new, but luckily it seems to be talked about more than it was. I remember attending my younger brother's high school graduation in Atlanta and listening to a great speech by Governor Zell Miller. He wished the graduates failure and then went on to list successful people who had many failures before they reached their ultimate goals. This was my first time hearing someone wish you failure, but since that time I've heard this wish echoed many times in graduation speeches across the country. I don't think boys can hear these stories enough, especially in our super competitive world. However, the best learning is through experience and helping your student or son process a failure. Students experience failure in multiple areas in the classroom or in other competitive arenas. By being vulnerable and showing up, each student has set himself up for potential failure. Some failures come at the end of months and months of preparation, as was the case for my son. I did ask for my son's permission to share this story with all of you today. He actually wrote a theme on this topic in his junior year entitled The Loss of Agency. The assignment was to write about a memorable day in your life that changed you. The class was reading Great Expectations, and they were responding to a quotation from Pip, which starts, "That was a memorable day to me, for it made great changes in me." My son wrote about competing on the math counts team in middle school, run by the legendary Mrs. Chen here at MBA. He had prepared for many years to compete in the state competition, studying on weekends and throughout the summer. His goal was to make it to the national competition. Since we are discussing failure, I think you can deduce he didn't make the national team. He was devastated, and for all the parents out there, you can relate that I was heartbroken for him. I reassured him as we left that it was fine, and there would be many more opportunities for him. I never knew exactly what he learned from this experience until last year when he wrote this theme. He wrote, "Right after the competition, I felt powerless. I thought there was no point in putting in hard work if the outcome was random. However, 2 weeks later, Mrs. Chen gave me some wise advice to change my outlook. She said, 'In life you will have good days, and you will have bad days, and you just had a bad day. All you can do is work hard to make the good days your very best, and the bad days not so bad.' This mindset shapes how I prepare for important events by incorporating the complexity of the world with my own agency. The future, which used to seem completely in my command, presents itself to me as a series of probabilities that I cannot control but can maximize to my great benefit." I am so grateful to Mrs. Chen for taking the time to see that he was struggling with this loss and helping him not to just overcome it, but to learn from it and persevere. I'm also grateful to Mr. Kelly, his English teacher, for giving him an opportunity to take a deeper look at a memorable day. This is a power that you have as educators and a way to see the essential in each student. Finally, the clearest way to see the soul of our boys is through regular communication. This is not easy because let's remember that they are teenagers and rarely want to communicate with us at all. One of my favorite quotes about raising teenagers is from the hilarious late Nora Ephron, who said, "When your children are teenagers, it's important to have a dog so that someone in the house is happy to see you." And yes, I have 2 dogs, and now I understand why my in-laws are so obsessed with their dogs. The car is a great place to talk with them while you are still chauffeuring them around for 2 main reasons. They are trapped with you, and eye contact is optional. But once they start to drive on their own, it is more difficult to find those times, so you have to be sly. Offering to take them to a favorite lunch or dinner spot is great. Any feeding opportunities are optimal times for getting in a discussion. But be careful if you pry too much or ask one too many questions. They will quickly prickle and leave. Teenagers are notorious for staying up late and then not being able to wake up. This is actually a biological fact that Frances E. Jensen writes about in her book, The Teenage Brain. She says one reason is that melatonin, a hormone critical to inducing sleep, is released 2 hours later in a teenager's brain than it is in an adult's. And it also stays in the teenager's system longer. And this is why it's so hard to wake your high schooler up in the morning. This book was so helpful to me in understanding the science behind a teenager. And she makes an interesting point that has resonated in my own home. My kids both want to talk when I'm wanting to go to bed. So I try to make an effort to sporadically make a visit to their rooms at 10 p.m. and just see what's going on with them. I find this to be a great time for them to open up. Generally, I have found that it is enough just to let your kids know that you are there if they need you. If you echo this sentiment, they will come to you when they are ready. The school can be very helpful in creating moments for communication. MBA has a weekly assembly where various speakers come to talk to the boys. A controversial speaker creates the biggest spark for conversation and allows all of us to discuss our opinions as a family. It is important to listen to your son's opinions and not belittle his thoughts. Ask questions and follow up later with a related article or a television segment. Also, find common interests, areas of interest in their school curriculum. I love English, so I usually will reread a classic that my son is reading so we can discuss it. My husband is interested in history, and so he and my son talk about what he is learning and their thoughts on each topic. Listening is so important with teenagers. It is difficult for humans, as Ernest Hemingway said, when people talk, listen completely. Most people never listen. Having a teenager is the best way to practice your listening skills. Of equal importance is listening to the feedback from the school and working as a team to reach our sons. At MBA, the boys receive comments on their grade reports at the end of each quarter. I'm always so impressed by how well each teacher knows my son. This feedback is a wonderful way to see talents emerging and help guide our sons to success and feeding their souls. I'm grateful to have had this time to speak with you all today. I know it isn't popular in today's atmosphere to talk about the plight of boys and men. But having a son and a daughter, I see very different paths. I remember when my son was 2, he asked Santa to bring him a play kitchen. This was discussed at a play group of moms and children, and several of the moms were surprised that we were going to purchase it for him. Fast forward a few years to my daughter at 2 and her obsession with Batman. No one blinked an eye when she asked for Batman toys and actually thought it was so cute. The path for girls to be who they are is much wider than it is for boys. My son loved his kitchen, and as a bonus, he's an excellent cook, and he enjoys cooking for his family and his friends. I am so grateful that the world is receptive for girls to be who they are and live their authentic lives. My wish is for boys to be given the same privilege. I wish them the vulnerability to step forward and be seen, the courage to fail, and someone to listen and guide when they do. The author Neil Gaiman perfectly said, "Make new mistakes, make glorious, amazing mistakes. Make mistakes nobody's ever made before." Thank you.